One.
Oh gosh.
All right. We are live on our first ever Ascend Athlete Training podcast. Today I have Tristan, Patrick, Ricky Moore, and Mahmoud Ozea.
Nailed it.
Close enough. I'll take it.
Our four head coaches through Ascend Athlete here on podcast. And our goal of today's first podcast is to review and talk about major themes coming up in cycle 2 of the 2023 training season. Right now, we're currently at the finish week of cycle 1, which was Andy's, and we are about to start next Monday, cycle 2. Today, we've got Tristan here, who is one of our main coaches. He heads up kind of bringing all of our programming together. So I'm going to be deferring to him a lot and picking his brain about what you guys are going to expect out of the next 8 weeks of training. And Coach Ricky is the head coach of our weightlifting program. So we'll be deferring to him a lot for questions regarding strength and what the plan is as far as getting you guys prepped for weightlifting and building your strength cycle. And Coach Mahmoud heads up our affiliate integration programming. So if you are one of our affiliates that do Ascend programming, we'll talk about how to implement them in classes and what we are looking for as far as our community, what the goal is, and how we are preparing our communities for the 2023 season as well. Cool. All right. So first person we're going to go to is we're going to go to Coach Tristan. He's going to give us a little overview of where we are at in totality for the season and what our plan is for these next 8 weeks.
Yeah, so this is our second cycle of the 2023 season. We just finished up our first cycle, and then the next cycle would be our more open prep cycle. So this cycle, we were just talking, I think is most important in the sense that if you're taking the 2023 season seriously and you want to really, peak for the open or quarterfinals, this is kind of the cycle of training where we need to make sure we're getting into the gym, make sure we're hitting our pieces and things like that. So overarching theme, a lot of work on gymnastics capacity under a little bit of fatigue, not necessarily maximal amounts of fatigue, but providing athletes a lot of opportunities to learn what they can do in a set of chest to bar or bar muscle ups or things like that under moderate amounts of fatigue, so they understand how it feels to do those things a little bit out of breath, but not crazy amounts of fatigue like we're going to see later on in the season. Lots of focus this cycle on longer AMRAPs, some more EMOMs in the longer time domains, some longer AMRAPs and things like that to get people used to kind of those longer cyclical pieces where you're just moving your body for a longer amount of time to build up a little bit of endurance.
I vote for as many EMOMs as possible. Just saying.
As many EMOMs as possible. Ricky, if Ricky had it his way, we would do 3 EMOMs.
EMOMs are king. That is true.
Thank you. Yep.
I do like a good EMOM. But you get mad at me when I change the lifting and do an EMOM because I'm short on time. What's up with that?
We can talk about that every time.
Yeah. And then obviously continuing to work on our monostructural work, which has some different focuses depending on the apparatus or the modality. So echo biking and rowing and things like that, which I'll dive into a little bit more in depth later. But this is, I would say the first cycle of the season was really about getting us a base and getting you ready for the season. And now this cycle is really about layering on that first layer of true adaptation and headway into making new gains for the season.
Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
Good. Go ahead, Mahmoud.
When you were talking about like building base, so what were we working on and how is that changing into the next season?
Yeah, so the first cycle, right?
Sorry, next cycle. You're right.
I got you. So the first cycle, we spent a lot of time on the different machines, doing different time durations, different energy systems. So just getting exposure to all the different modalities on all the different machines and also getting comfortable with those things, starting to learn some paces a little bit and things like that. Similarly to what Ricky had people doing with their weightlifting, right? We did a really big high rep squat cycle. We're just now starting to get into the shorter reps and the higher weights to build that base of volume in the squats. So that was the purpose of the monostructural work for the first cycle. And for the Metcons of the first cycle was very much just about GPP and exposure. A lot of people were coming off of some downtime, whether they took time off in the summer and, you know, they just kind of did whatever, or we had some people coming off of the game season and just getting them back into like, hey, this is CrossFit, right? Like this is this movement. You haven't done this in a while. This is a 15-minute AMRAP. This is a 9-minute AMRAP, 2-minute intervals, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Great. From your perspective, Tristan, too, would you consider this true start of the 2023 season, or would you consider this next phase still off-season training before we get to the season?
I would call this,
Great question.
I would call this preseason.
Okay.
So if we were to put this in a, you know, the strength and conditioning world sport specific example, I would call this preseason, right?
The one we just did, or the one we're going into?
The one we're going into.
Yeah. So so if we're comparing it to other sports, we're still kind of working in the weight room, working on the nuts and bolts that we're going to put together to create an athlete that's better at sport specific movement, maybe in an upcoming cycle. So we're not quite to our full kind of sport specific training. We're kind of working on accessory pieces still to put things together.
Correct.
Yeah, I would probably see it. Tristan, tell me if I'm wrong. It's probably more like we just did mini camp or finishing up mini camp. Now we're going into preseason. Exactly. And then going into like the first 4 weeks of a football season, then the next 4 weeks, so on and so forth, is how I would see it.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it.
Right, because I think that's a concept that's missed a lot in our sport, is training. The sport of CrossFit is great. It's going to get you good at CrossFit. It's going to get you fit. It's a great way for GPP. And for some of our athletes, Mahmood, who are more in kind of our classes that are looking to live a healthy lifestyle. But if we're really trying to move the needle on specific areas and specific domains of our sport, we need to train it in phases where we're off season to work on those things and build those different capacities to work on our weaknesses.
Correct.
And this is basically where you make the improvement before you apply it into training.
Correct. And the way we do things by structuring out the season this way is much better from an injury management perspective and a burnout perspective. That's part of the reason we do this.
Theoretically.
Would you say that, like, at this point, intention training is a major key? Like, what you know what this piece is intended for, and not just like going in, sending it every day, every time, PRing whenever you can. Yes. So, yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I will dive into that a little bit more when we talk about some specific modalities or parts of the programming. But yes, intention in this block of training and awareness can really set up athletes to have great success in the open prep cycle and throughout the rest of the season.
Intention with like relaxation as well, you know, like not saying like, oh, I have to get all 5 days in, or I have to get should be doing double days. It's like when you're there at the gym, maximize your time, but still go on about your life with other things, like family and everything else.
Yeah, I'm just meant like you don't want to go in every day with the mentality I'm doing train. I'm just gonna go and actually train, right?
Yeah. No, you can do that. You can go. I mean, if you have a
not everybody
you definitely do that. 100%.
You can do Fran every day. The rest 100%. Of us cannot.
I definitely would too if I could.
Okay, so let's take kind of a Mahmood same question and morph it a little bit over to Ricky to kind of start making our transition towards talking about our strength phases and weightlifting phases coming up. So Mahmood's question was, what did we finish wrapping up in this past cycle as far as strength, and how is that changing and transitioning into the next cycle coming up?
No, yeah, for sure. So Tristan already alluded to some of it. Is basically we want to start with a good foundation of strength. The big thing was the squat was probably the main strength focus. So we started out with like a lot of hypertrophy, high volume and stuff like that. Doing the basic, you know, starting at 50% and working our way up to now where I think we just hit 75% for like sets of 5 and 6s, which a lot of people loved. I mean that in both seriously and that was probably the main key, because in CrossFit you have to have a good solid leg volume and strength base. And then we also spent a lot of time doing a lot of complexes for lifting, probably 4 times a week. And that's basically trying to hone in on where people are weak at and focusing on certain positions. We started from the top, working our way down, with also adding more pulls in to really help people get the bar on the correct path. And that weekend we started with high volume, doing like maybe 8 sets of 4 reps at 60% for high hang cleans or snatches. Then also like overhead mobility with overhead squats as well. So kind of just progressed on that over the 8 weeks. And one of the other things I was going to say, yeah, I think that's the main 2 parts of that. And then now what we're going to do into the next 8 weeks is kind of like really putting the pieces that everyone has been working on together, and then incorporating that in like an EMOM style of like barbell movements, whether that's clean and jerks, snatch, what have you, with also bringing an emphasis on overhead pressing, because we didn't do much of that from a compound movement standpoint last. Like we did that in a lot of the accessory work, but now adding that to our repertoire coming up while improving on the squats as well. I don't think we did anything in the clean or snatch above 80% until this week, which we had, I think, Mahmoud, tell me if I'm wrong, we had a lot of people like PRing, right?
That is true. Yep.
People PR their clean for a clean pull and 2 cleans.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, which has like obviously is in my realm is just a great benchmark and check mark of like we're doing the right things. You know, taking the time spending in those positions was more than worth it. So, which is always what you like to see. And then I think also having the leg strength and the leg volume over time gives them that much more confidence to be able to do that, and also power production, of course. So, and then this next cycle, like I said, we're going to continue to add on to that. A little less complexes. We'll still have some, but not a lot. But we'll have a lot more full reps and a lot more power-based movements in the Olympic lifts as well. We will, at the end of the cycle, be testing either maybe not a full 1RM, but getting close to that. And most of them, like clean and jerk, I think we'll do 1RMs, snatch, back squat. I don't know. Maybe having some individuals do it, but probably not the general group, because I think a 2 or 3 rep max is going to be a little bit more important rather than a 1 rep max on the back squat side. So, yeah, and just continuing like more or less the movement patterns with the strength, like emphasis and confidence over the next 8 weeks leading into the open. Basically now it's like getting them the confidence to lift any weight that they want off the ground and overhead. And then when we go into like high volume barbell cycling, no matter what the weight is, like they have that, I mean, I'm not the best with big words. Like I think it's like aptitude or just confidence to do those things.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that you spent 8 weeks working on positioning and that actually made them stronger?
Yeah, it's weird, right?
It's really weird.
Yeah.
So-
Never heard of that before.
What that really tells us is that we had technical improficiencies, right? That breaking down and repetitive work at the lower percentages helped us clean up some of those limiters out of technique and missing some of those positions. So they're able to truly express some more of the strength that they gained through developing raw strength in our squats and pulls that we worked on this cycle.
Yeah, and I think so this is going to be probably a can of worms, so be ready for this. Is, like just taking the time, like CrossFitters do not lift well, right? Like granted, like the elites lift well, but that's just because like they took the time to work with an Oli coach or anything like that. But general population of CrossFitters do not lift well. And that is a combination of many things, which we won't get to on this right now, but having somebody that is extremely passionate about weightlifting and how things look, because I know how it looks now will determine the success overall in the end, and just the proficiency, both inside and outside of the gym, help tremendously. So I think that is like a big thing that I wish CrossFit and USA weightlifting would work more hand in hand on the education side to really help coaches and help individuals learn how to lift what first properly and then under fatigue. Because I think there's a huge thing that CrossFit and weightlifting that they don't hold each other to that kind of standard, which, as you guys have heard me say, is like the biggest problem in CrossFit, both from Olympic weightlifting and gymnastics. So,
Yeah, which is a huge piece of kind of where we started this podcast, of kind of reminding everyone where we are at in the season. This 8 weeks that we just wrapped up was more of our off-season training, where we're spent time refining skills, so that way the fitness that we gain more towards those in-season cycles can truly be expressed. You're not limited so much by those technical errors and just quality of movement, right? Like, the main piece and key to being successful in CrossFit is turning anaerobic movement into aerobic as possible movement.
Yes.
And the way we do that is by improving efficiency and quality of movement. So time spent now in these cycles refining that movement and getting more comfortable and relaxed and understanding those concepts is going to benefit you in allowing you to express that fitness with better quality later down the road when it's time to really breathe fire.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. With that being said, oh, sorry, Tristan, did I get on you?
No, I was just going to say, I think this comes back to what Mahmood mentioned in the beginning with intention, right? And I think I could speak for Ricky a little, and I know I feel this way. At this point in the season, right, say we have snatch, EMOM, plus overhead squat, just because I know that's fresh on my mind because we talked about it yesterday coming up. I would much rather an athlete come in, warm up really well, focus on executing that EMOM as perfectly as possible every single repetition of their snatch and overhead squats, and move with as much intention as possible, then come in, half-ass their warm-up, sling the bar around like a psycho, check the box that they did their lifting, and then go do 3 more Metcons. It's not the time of season for that.
Or fail like 13 out of 15 lifts.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
No, that's actually another great point here. This is, I think, a huge talking point is I had this conversation with Kelly actually last week of like, hey, like you actually can get the most done during your warm up. Like you can actually get the most like technical proficiency focused on and change during your warm up. Granted, the problem is with a lot of CrossFitters, they're just like, see the workout on the board, like, yeah, okay, we got this every minute on the minute. I just got to get to there and just get the clock going. It's like, take your time, like really warm up and focus on like I think that's just been the big overarching thing over this whole thing is like the intention, right? And like the intention is not how much weight you can lift. It's how you can move it, like at least right now and where we are in the season and where your goals should be. Like, yeah, when it comes open time, it's like, look, I'm going to be honest, I don't really care how it looks right now. It's like when it's game time, you just got to do it. But this is the time, like you were saying, Tristan, to like really have the intention and just take your time with that. Like plan out the whole session. You know, if you only have an hour, pick 2 things where you need to work on the most. And like, it should be the warm up if it's Olympic weightlifting. And then it should be like, okay, getting warm for like the conditioning piece if you already have a 300-pound snatch, you know?
Yeah. And I think also like if we look at it from an affiliate kind of view or point of view, it's the same. That's why we try and fit it into a 1-hour session. How can we give athletes time to prepare themselves? How can we give athletes time to actually warm up properly? But not only that, if you're thinking about the coaching individual, the person in charge of coaching, this is the time that he can actually make changes. This is the time that he can go to an athlete, hey, let's change this a little bit and see how it feels. If you go to them at their 80% snatch and change their stance, guess what? They're not going to respond. Even if it's correct, they're not going to like how it feels, and they're going to refrain from it. So I think not only on the athlete side, but also on the coaching side and affiliate setting, you want to use that warm-up time to improve their lift and work on if there are any changes to be done. Like I have an athlete that tells me whenever it's max day, don't talk to me. Like I know if I'm doing it wrong, this is max day. I'm not going to change anything. Right. And I understand, but throughout the cycle, this is where we try and put our work. So when we get to game day, our form is as proficient as possible.
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay. Let's kind of wrap up lifting and those major themes and kind of move our way over to the monostructural area. So I'm going to let Tristan kind of take the lead. Let's start with that same kind of basis of question of where we came from and what we're going to see changing and what direction that we are headed in the next 8 weeks from a monostructural standpoint.
Yeah, so the last cycle, right, I alluded to, we spent a lot of time in different time domains on the rower, the fan bike, the running and things like that. We did do a 1 mile kind of time trial cycle to get people's mile kind of back up to snuff. I think that's something that's beneficial to have squared away a little bit earlier in the season. Obviously, when we look at the open and quarterfinals, we're not going to be doing open road running. We know shuttle runs are a thing now, and I think will return. But that's not really the same thing. So that comes a little bit later. And this cycle is where the machine conditioning, so to speak, really takes some different paths. The rowing specific work is actually the only what I would call mandatory monostructural work for this cycle. It's on Mondays. And I know we have, different people doing pro path and, compete and things like that. But for the pro path people, even that is the only mandatory monostructural piece of this cycle. These pieces are longer. We're looking at 20 to 34 minutes, I think is the longest one, generally longer time domains. And this is to build that base of aerobic capacity and endurance in those muscle fibers as big as we can get it before we move into the open prep cycle, where we are going to be much more focused on the rower, specifically on higher power output for that 6 minute time window, what we would traditionally think of as like a 2K for most people. Anybody who's been doing CrossFit for any amount of time knows they're being able to get on the rower and crank for an entire Metcon at a relatively high power output is almost a cheat code, right? You just can outlast people, or you can row a slower pace that is hurting somebody else to hold, and you're recovering basically, or you're at least not further damaging your ability to do work. So we're building a big base of capacity and endurance in our rowing right now, and then we will transition that to allow us to have a higher output in the open prep cycle. For the running work, coming off of a 1 mile time trial kind of cycle, we're going to keep the running work relatively short and more high power output. This leans in a little bit toward that shuttle run feeling. We know, I think you guys would agree, basically athletes fall in two categories with shuttle runs. They're either like, oh, I'm great at these for some reason, or I'm terrible at these for some reason, and I don't really know why. So getting some athletes more exposure on just a faster turnover speed with their running, getting on and off the line quicker. So some 200s, some 400s, some shuttle run specific conditioning and things like that, but not nearly the amount of 800s, 1200s and things like that we did the last cycle. I know everybody was a big fan of those 1200 meter runs.
I mean, I love it.
With half the rest. Sorry. And then for the fan bike, we're going to peak the fan bike kind of power output now, so that when we move into the open prep cycle, we're going into much more of a lactate threshold, super high intensity cycle to help the body get the adaptation of clearing that lactate out of the legs and using it for fuel in those high intensity CrossFit workouts, right? We know that, as Ricky stated, having a good base of leg volume is super important for the sport, but also that leg endurance is critical. You've got to be able to just hammer weights, and that is the adaptation of that lactate threshold. But before we get there, we're going to make sure we can hold a lot of power for a good amount of time. So a lot of the assault bike or echo bike pieces this cycle are based on wattage and try to hold certain wattages. There's some calorie pieces as well, but we're generally looking at things 4, 5, 6 minutes at a time, titrating down in terms of the time duration across a session, and very much focused on not maximal power output, but maximal sustainable power output to build that kind of system on the bike. And then we are sprinkling in consistent C2 bike and ski erg conditioning. These are optional pieces. And while these things are somewhat staples of the sport now at this point, if we look at the traditional CrossFit season, they're not really always present. We haven't really seen those things in quarterfinals of the open, some regionals and semifinals of those kind of things. But so these are just very undulating. You're going to go long on the ski erg. You're going to go short on the C2 bike for intervals. You're going to go long on the C2 bike. You're going to go mid-range on the ski erg for intervals, and just varying it similarly to what we did with the other machines and monostructural movements this last cycle to get people as familiar as possible with, oh, I have to ski a 3K. I have no fucking idea what I'm going to hold for a 3K ski. Now you do, right? And then you can use that information for a 2K ski or a 4K ski or whatever. And just different time domains to, one, build their energy systems, but also help them understand the paces they can hold on those machines for different time durations.
Another thing kind of coming up this season that does have a lot to do with our gymnastics or our conditioning pieces as well as monostructural is we're going to start closing the gap a little bit on our gymnastics work and our monostructural work and bringing those a little bit closer together by starting to get us a little bit of gymnastics volume under fatigue, utilizing the machines to create some of that stress and some of that fatigue. To work on pushing up our capacity in larger sets before we put it in a true Metcon type structure, right? Can you talk about that, Tristan, just a little bit?
Yeah, I think, I could go down a physiological rabbit hole with why I think this is a really good thing to do, but I won't. Basically, if we look at two different types of fatigue, we look at aerobic fatigue and then we look at kind of muscular fatigue and things like that. It's generally a lot easier for athletes to keep moving and keep their shit together with aerobic fatigue rather than that muscle overload or getting a huge blood pressure spike from a super heavy lift or a super heavy sled. So the purpose of that is twofold, right? Getting that exposure that you mentioned and building up that volume, and also helping athletes understand, okay, I have a set of, I just did 27 chest to bar. Say I did that unbroken, cool. If not, maybe, okay, I did that in 2 sets. I now know I can do that in 2 sets. And then we have a 20 cal echo bike, let's say. Well, what happens if I hold 72 RPMs versus 70? Can I do the subsequent set of 21 unbroken if I hold 72? Or am I gassed out? Or is my rest time 20 seconds versus getting right up on the bar, right? So providing these pieces once to twice a week for athletes to just learn, right? Yes, we're building our volume, and yes, we're doing those things that we need to be able to do for the sport. But I think the most important part of those pieces is presenting athletes with an opportunity to play, in a sense, with what happens when I do this, right? And I think it's important for athletes to do that because, so I think now in the sport, we get so wrapped around, oh, I didn't go unbroken, or, oh, I blew up, or this, that, and the other. And, the saying, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. Like, I just think it's really beneficial for athletes to find the edge. And it's like, okay, I got on there and like, I'm a bigger dude. Say I got on the bike and I was like, I'm going to crank 75, baby. And we're just going to get this bike done. And I'm going to see what happens on these chest to bar. And I explode. It's like, okay, well, now I know I cannot hold at this point 75 RPMs on the bike and do 21 chest to bar unbroken with a short transition.
Are you referring to a certain graph that's kind of like all over, or it's like this axis is, something find out. This one is
that graph. F around and find out graph.
Yes.
I basically with those pieces, I'm encouraging athletes to do that right now because it's no stress, right? You're still getting fitter, you're still building capacity, you're still getting better. So it's not, if you have an epic meltdown on one of these pieces with, shuttle runs and ring muscle ups or whatever, it's like, okay, who cares? You have data. So now you can address that weakness or you can strategize better down the road when it matters. Mm-hmm. But if you never find out, you're never going to know.
Right. If you never push that threshold of what the capacity is and kind of always default to the same comfortable sets or same comfortable paces, we're not pressing on that training adaptation that we need to continue to move that needle forward.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, same kind of thing, talking just a little bit about gymnastics now before we swing back to bringing all 3 pieces together with our Metcons is I want to defer over to Mahmood just a little bit really quick. This last cycle we worked on a little bit more accessory work as far as gymnastics, some awareness when we're upside down, some developmental pieces. And coming up for affiliates specifically in more of our train blogs and stuff, we're going to have an opportunity to individualize some of your gymnastics or skill development by giving athletes an opportunity to choose some of their development. This is something that we have done in the past. And I just want to quickly give a little bit of an overview to Mahmood of what athletes should be doing with that allocated time and what their goals should be with that kind of cycle coming up.
Right. So as Tristan said, there's going to be a lot of gymnastics plus conditioning, but we don't want to skip the fundamentals of just learning the skill of gymnastics. Not everybody has every skill, especially in an affiliate setting, not in a professional athletic setting. So we want to still provide that. So we're going to have weekly pieces where you got 10 minutes to just practice the technique and practice the skills and work on given options for progressions that takes you from a level of I don't have the movement period, I don't know what to do, to I can work on progressions and skills that gets me closer to the movement and gives me more volume to practice it, gives me more chance to practice it without the looming factor of what's my time, or what's my score, I don't want to mess up the leaderboard. So while we still work on gymnastics capacity under fatigue, we're going to still provide, especially for our affiliate setting option, is I am going to work on one skill that I don't have across this 8-week cycle, or maybe even 2 skills if you want to put in some extra work. There will be weekly increase in levels of progressions. We're not going to do the same thing every week. We're going to start at the base level and just build up our skill capacity until we are much, much closer, if not proficient, at this gymnastics skill.
Great. And I think just to preface, so everyone from our athletes that are on pro blogs down to athletes on train that are training at our affiliate that are doing accessory program with Peak and whatnot are addressing these similar themes in programming that we're talking about. We're just giving them kind of skill appropriate and level appropriate ways to go about that, right? So this opportunity here with these EMOMs and picking your skill will kind of take the place of some of that capacity under fatigue that some of our more elite athletes that have perfected that skill will be focusing, because they're focusing on a little more of that volume and being able to execute under fatigue, whereas some of our more beginner athletes still need to focus on skill acquisition before we kind of get to that point.
Exactly. And it will also be encouraged to put the coaches in a position where, like, hey, I think you can go at this level of progression versus, hey, I think you should start here. So, for example, if I have somebody who has, for example, ring muscle ups and he's very proficient at them, I will work on increasing his capacity, versus if I have somebody who doesn't have ring muscle up and he wants to or she wants to get it, then I will work on developing that skill. So those 10 windows not only provide the athlete a chance for that, but also gives the coach some creativity in the field of which progression should I use here.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Mahmood. Okay.
Make a point really quick, just for the athletes who, might be on Compete, or even some athletes who might be doing the pro blog and they train alone, right? They might train with some friends or something like that, but they don't necessarily have a coach there with eyes on them. Most athletes know if their movement is not clean and precise on a gymnastics movement. So with that, going back to the chest to bar example we were talking about, if you know that your chest to bar, even though you're doing the pro, right, and you are a very fit and strong individual and have great capacity, if you know deep down inside that your chest to bar are not very efficient and you're just OP at vertical pulling strength and just make it happen, there's nothing wrong with cutting out that gymnastics plus monostructural piece and spending 15, 10, 20 minutes, whatever you have, on I'm going to do 10 sets of 5 perfect chest to bar. I'm going to video every one, and then I'm going to DM them to Emily on Instagram, or DM them to me, or DM them to whatever.
Plug Coach Hattie. She's great.
Or Hattie, exactly. Like we're still in the point in the season where we don't have to have capacity volumes maxed out. It's okay to take time to refine that movement, even if you're a high-level compete athlete or somebody doing the pro blog and you're generally good at those things. Those people still typically have some things they could clean up on some movement. And there's nothing wrong with cutting out a piece here and there during this cycle and spending time refining those things.
But Coach Tristan, that's not fun.
I feel like I didn't do anything today.
Sorry.
And you're also saying that will not take away from their fitness, that they're fit enough that they can afford to spend time on skill learning?
No, they will lose fitness for sure. No, they're going to get significantly worse so fast.
You're going to be so unfit after one day of not doing 2 Metcons. Gosh.
That's, for those that don't understand sarcasm, that is sarcasm.
Yeah. And going back, right, the way to win at the sport, to gain the sport, is to be more efficient, to have these skills not hurt you aerobically as bad as the person next to you.
Yes.
If you just look at the 2 champions, they were both Olympic weightlifters. So
that's all he's saying.
Literally all I'm saying.
Something I wanted to make sure and bring up just for people who are going to be on the pro blog and also compete blog, you're going to see in this cycle a couple days a week, there's going to be optional pieces. And the instructions for that is pick one of 2 based off perceived weaknesses, right? Again, circling back, most people know what they're not good at. So you should, obviously prioritize from there. The other side of that is I'm not interested right now in Coach Tristan, can I do both? The answer for 99.9% of people is no. Because we're not there yet. I promise you, when we're doing open prep, you are going to have all the Metcons you could ever want. But right now, going back to what Ricky was talking about in the beginning, focusing on your recovery and things like that, those things are still paramount. So listen to the instructions, pick one of the 2 based off your perceived weaknesses, and do the piece that you choose with intention and move the needle in that thing you're choosing to pick to work on that day versus, I'm just going to do both, and you just slob your way through it to say you did.
Well, yeah, I think that brings up maybe another topic for another time of talking about when when should you be picking which things to do? If you're a female and you have a 220-pound snatch, but your 1 mile time is, 10 minutes.
What are you talking about over there?
not, you haven't hit 220 yet. But let's say you have a 1 mile that's 10 minutes. You probably don't have to spend all the time lifting, but maybe doing both of those conditioning pieces throughout the week, coming up with let's say you have you're really good at open workouts, but you're a dude and your best snatch is 185.
Again,
time.
What are you talking about over there?
Ricky's just tearing y'all down over here.
Actually, I actually wasn't thinking about either one of you, but it's actually really funny because it actually is pretty close. Except Emily, you ran a 640 at the games. You're not at 10 minutes. So
also my snatch is 195.
Yeah. There you go. So you exaggerated a little bit on both cases, but it was close.
But I think that's like I said, is a good argument, a good topic for a different time. Okay, should I really be doing both of these conditioning pieces, or should I be focusing on on the lifting? I think that's a question that should be brought up at a different time for sure.
Yeah, it's something we could definitely sit down and kind of talk about, because there's a lot of different ways that you could slice that pie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on who the athlete is.
All right, last one, Tristan. Let's unpack some of what we have to look forward to for the Metcons and some of the good juicy stuff coming up this next cycle that I know everyone's looking forward to.
Oh yeah, so GPP is still the guiding principle right now. Obviously, we're not narrowing down on those super sport specific things. That being said, there is going to be a little more of things that might feel like that sprinkled in. There might be some EMOMs that make you think it was an open workout, but it wasn't. We are going to see a couple of the quarterfinal workouts come back for some retesting. I like putting those things in now versus right before the open. I think this is a better time because there's still way more time to make adaptation and see where you kind of come in the next couple months. There's going to be pieces, and you guys can help me make sure people don't misunderstand what I mean when I say that I'm writing these. There's going to be pieces, particularly some EMOMs and some workouts with some time caps, we are okay with you not making it. The reason for that is, one, and Ricky would argue this probably on the hill until he dies, you can go a lot longer than you think you can. So one, there's value in realizing that. And we're writing some pieces that are going to make some people realize that. But two, back to what Emily and I talked about a little bit earlier, it's good to know where the edge is, because then you really know if you're progressing in something or not, right? So there's going to be some pieces, perhaps a workout next Friday for the first week that I'm really excited about, that are you're going to look at it on paper and you're going to be like, what? I don't know. You can do it, or you can get way further than you think you can. Now, that being said, please use discretion and think these things through. If you look at that EMOM and you're like, bruh, I'm not making it 7 minutes, and it's a 21-minute EMOM, then let's scale back. And we're going to have some things in the notes and things like that for kind of helping you modulate those things for you as an individual athlete. But the big thing with these Metcons is, other than, like I said, GPP and variance is still going to be very much a thing. We're going to be kind of upping the intensity for those longer time domains, whether it's AMRAPs or EMOMs and things like that, for multiple reasons that I could go into, but basically confidence.
Ooh, so question for you on that. So let's say we do week 1, we do that 21-minute AMRAP, but then I do, instead of, I'm fine with the row, the dumbbell snatch is probably a little heavy, and then the ring muscle ups is kind of a lot just because of my capacity. Mm-hmm. And I do week 1, let's say did I just give the workout away basically?
Kind of, it's fine.
Oh, well. But let's say we do this same EMOM again at the end. Should I do it the way I did it week 1 to show like, okay, I feel more confident, or should I try to do it as prescribed now because I've also gotten a little bit more capacity and stuff like that? What are your thoughts on that?
So I would say that depends on how much you regress down from as written right now, right? If you shave off a muscle up, 2 calories on the row, and do a 50 instead of a 70, then when you retest, I would say do the calories on the rower, do that last muscle up, maybe keep the dumbbell the same. Or leave the calories what you did, leave the muscle ups what you did, and instead of using a 50, grab a 60 for 8 or 10, right? So that would be kind of generally how I would say to look at that. I think with EMOMs, especially over an 8-week cycle, it is good to just tick things up a hair when you redo them, rather than, especially if you complete it, rather than just doing it again and being like, oh, that was easier.
Yeah, I guess EMOM probably isn't the best one, but like probably like benchmarks or stuff that we test. Like, you know, if somebody had to scale something back, I mean, we might disagree on that, but I would say like I would want to see somebody do the exact same version that they did and just do it faster.
For a benchmark, for sure.
Yeah, like a quarterfinals workout when somebody has a 365-pound clean, but let's say we're still going to go 205 for the shuttle run clean and jerk workout, but whatever. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that point, Ricky. I was going to say, I think the major defining factor there is the fact that it's an EMOM. To me, EMOMs are for training. That is the purpose of it. It's not necessarily a testing modality. But if you saw it, a very similar thing structured in 3 rounds for time, it would be advantageous to redo it the same way. So that way you can see those metrics and see that improvement on paper. With an EMOM, I think it's more about training and repeating and trying to progress that training.
One quick question that I'm sure is going to be asked for people who don't have an athletic or a sports background. What is GPP?
General physical preparedness.
Okay.
I want you to be good at so many different things right now. And I don't want you to necessarily be the best CrossFitter right now. And I think it's also, I guess, important. We can touch on this really fast. I know we're cruising here and we've went longer, but because not a lot of people talk about this in the setting that we do. When we say sport specific for CrossFit, we take a very detailed lens to that. So when we say sport specific, we're looking at the movements we know will be in the open, the movements we know or can make an educated guess, we'll be in quarterfinals. And then we would take that same approach for semifinals and the games for those athletes who make it that far. Now, obviously, there's always a little bit that's thrown in that we don't know. That is why we always do have variance in our training. But when we talk about sport specific for CrossFit, we're talking burpees, the ability to do 150 toe to bar to 200 toe to bar at intensity, the ability to do high rep box jump overs, and then hit a heavy clean and jerk at the end of a workout, right? Those things. Like, we narrow down on what is the sport specific metrics and things we do in the sport, right? Anybody who just did cycle one, once a week, you were carrying a heavy sandbag for 2, 3, 4, 500 meters. That's not sport specific, but it makes you better at the sport later on, right? So that's how we kind of move through the season until we end up on that very, very sport specific training that we're doing in open prep, quarters prep, semis prep. Same thing that Ricky was alluding to with the Olympic lifts, right? Built a big base. Now we're getting better at pulling from the floor and overhead stability. Then we're going to move into barbell cycling and things like that, which we know is very sport specific, right?
Which is funny because there's actually two definitions of sport specific training by, like, there's two groups in the strength and conditioning world. Like, one is like sport specific training is doing the sport. And then there's like sport specific training is like, okay, I'm doing these certain exercises, or like, you know, periodizing outside of the season to make you better at the sport. I think CrossFit is a little bit different because I know you're saying doing sandbag stuff isn't sport specific, but actually we do sandbag carries in CrossFit.
Right.
So basically, sport specific in the world of CrossFit, if you call it a sport, if you're one of those that does or doesn't really matter. Like, we're always doing sport specific stuff in a sense, because like even burpees are CrossFit. Like, monostructural work is CrossFit. Weightlifting is weightlifting, then CrossFit. So it's for those that are probably going to come out like sport specific this, and it's like we are and we're not. That's the beauty about CrossFit to a degree, you know.
I think another way to talk about is like traditional CrossFit versus like varied CrossFit or off-season training for CrossFit.
If somebody doesn't like my definitions, they can DM me at TristanP_coaching, and I'm more than happy to have a lengthy conversation.
Oh, plug. I need to learn how to write things on the screen. That'll be podcast number 2.
We should, in our little name things, just put our Instagram handles.
Next time.
But yes, you're right, Ricky.
Yeah, I think right, but a lot of those things like sandbags. Now I'm getting off on the tangent because I need my opinion heard. But those sandbags and stuff aren't tested until later in the season. So there's a barrier of entry before you even get tested on those things. And I think the sport specific skills Tristan is talking about is being proficient on the skills that will limit you from advancing in the season, that are kind of the basis of the barrier of entry to when you even get to play and express all of those other things that are encompassed in CrossFit, right?
Correct.
And there goes Mama Emily coming into between the two kids.
What she does.
Hey, you're both right, but also there's valid to both of your positions.
Okay, let's work on wrapping this guy up. What do we have for kind of closing things, additional things that we think everybody should know, what to look forward to kind of these next 8 weeks?
I guess I'll go first. I would say the biggest thing I would want any athlete to do who's doing the next cycle is what we talked about in the very beginning, and just be intentional with your training. Be intentional with your training, be intentional with your movement, and be aware. There's a huge opportunity this cycle to learn and receive the data from the monostructural machines or the Metcons and things like that on what your capacities are. And you are such a better athlete when you learn those things and you pay attention to them, rather than, every time there's a rowing workout, you just get on there and crank her down to a 140 and hold on tight, because that's probably not the play, right? So taking this opportunity to be aware and learn and do things with intention will really move the needle for people throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that, because I think we naturally just started about that with like the intention and everything, and understanding like, hey, like the holidays and everything are coming up, and it's like, it's not do or die if you don't get all of your training sessions in. Enjoy the holidays, enjoy the time with your family. because we all know, like, as soon as January 1 hits, everybody's going to be like, ah. So do that. But when you allot yourself the time, like, plan out when you're going to do it. Like, if you only got an hour to do it, like, be diligent and intentional, like we were saying, with how you want to attack each day and each workout. But it's okay if you don't get it all in. Okay. So that's probably the one thing I would just say.
Yeah, and I guess, like, again, piggybacking off of that, like, especially when it comes to being in an affiliate and working out with a group of people, sometimes letting go of the leaderboard is good for you, especially if you really need to develop a gap in your fitness or a gap in your abilities to later on be able to compete and actually get a good score that you want to, especially if you're looking to do well in the open, looking to do well in a local competition, looking to do well in the quarterfinals. You need to go into the season prepared versus leading the leaderboard in a few workouts. Yeah. So always try and make sure that, again, piggybacking off of intention, but I think that's the key word for today's podcast, is making sure that you hit every workout with intention, trying to understand what the coaches need from you in that workout, trying to understand, read the notes, and be very aware of what you're doing versus just making it a fun, sexy workout. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but when you're training, not every workout is going to be fun. There will be some, but not everyone will be fun.
It's going to be a lot of stuff this cycle. It's not fun.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I think that's a pretty good wrap up of cycle 2 for 2023. Alps coming in hot. And just a reminder, that does start this coming Monday. It starts on Halloween Day. So if you're not signed up just yet, we do offer a free trial for all of our blogs starting in. You get 2 weeks for free just by signing up. And if you're interested in a little bit more personalization and customization, reach out to us, fill out our inquiry form about one-on-one coaching, and we can sit down and kind of have a call and help figure out the best coach for you and how to direct this season. Cool. Nice. Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. We will chat again.
See you guys.
Yeah.